Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening. And don't forget to subscribe for free.
My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy podcast. As regular listeners know, and I hope you do subscribe, please do, because it helps us and it helps the show get more interest and information and helps people to grow as well. But as regular listeners actually know, what I intend to do is to shine a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed personal protection operations. Operations which are governmental. So we're not talking about private protection, we're talking about protected, etc. And what I do with that is I then explain to people how that works within the geopolitical world, a world which I inhabited for more than 30 years, and how that world affects everybody. Today, on my show, I've got a fantastic guest. It's Dr. Tracy Hopwood. And as I often say, the reason why I bring guests onto this is twofold. One is to give the guests the opportunity to ask me whatever they want about the secret world because they're generally interested in the world. But secondly, and more importantly, is to show how the secret world impacts upon what they and how they function. And as always, it's a matter of inspiring and actually letting individuals know that they should be involved and should understand what the people in the secret world do in their name. So, Tracy, tell me about yourself.
So I'm a GP, been a GP, I was qualified as a doctor in 1995, and then I kind of fell into the world of prison medicine. And I did that because I had an interest in treating people with addictions. So those on methadone and starting people off that were heroin abusers. And of course, most of those, if not all of them at some point, had been in prison. So it kind of led me to think that I'd quite like to see what went on the other side of the walls, if you like.
That's fantastic. You say you fell into it. How does a doctor fall into work within a prison? I'm sure it's a little bit more complicated than just falling into it.
Well, I was a GP in Dover for many years, and there were a lot of substance misusers there. And at that time, so it was in the early 2000s, there weren't that many doctors that would help out these clients. And I was a new doctor in the practice, and they were looking for somebody to help out with this big group of people that needed some help and care. And because I was the new one in the practice, it kind of fell to me. But then I found that I really loved it, actually. And there were some really interesting people that you meet, and lots of stories and that, yeah. So I got quite fascinated by it.
So kind of two things come off that, Tracy, for me. One is that you seem to be saying it as such as though you were the last in, so the first to get the role as such. But also that you mentioned that people, I don't want to phrase it incorrectly, but as though your colleagues didn't want to deal with these type of people. Is that too strong, or?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think if you're going to have, when you have a practice, the people that might cause you big troubles are those that are the substance misusers. We used to have a lot of problems with people turning up at the practice, perhaps usually on a Friday evening, demanding various drugs of misuse, saying that they'd just been released from prison, and if they didn't get what what they wanted, then they were going to cause trouble in the practice. And yeah, I've been threatened a few times in the practice and had things thrown at me because they wanted to, have some dihydrocodeine or whatever it was at that time. So yeah, none of the other doctors were that interested in getting involved in that.
Surprise, surprise.
Well, actually, once I started, it actually benefited the practice because the clients would know that they had to come to me and everything had to go through me, and they couldn't kind of shop around to see other doctors and try and get drugs from here, there, or everywhere. So actually, it benefited us dramatically.
So that's an interesting one. So already my mind begins to think, number one, you're saying that's back in the 1990s. Has it improved? And number two, if people are touring around looking for a doctor to prescribe them drugs which they can't get, which they're going to utilize, which they're going to abuse, frankly, I hope I'm right in saying that, should this not be something that is separated from the general NHS, and that there should be areas where people can be dealt with whom have this problem?
Yeah, it is a lot better. So, because I've been in it all this time, the setups are much better, but it obviously depends on the politics at the time, who's in government and things like that, as to how much money they're going to put into this, the resources, and how they actually manage it. So, for example, since I've been in this field, there seems to be this cycle where initially it's, get everyone onto methadone and then get them off as quick as you can. So the clients then don't get a choice. So they've got long-standing addiction problems that, and they're not quite ready within themselves to take that step. That's it. I'm prescribing for you. You will have to come off it. And that's when they tend to go straight back onto drugs or crime or end up back in prison. And then we go to the other side where it's, you can maintain them on things and as long as they like. But each new service that gets commissioned in your local area is always a different way of dealing with things.
So it's a drug czar, which we know we've had in the past, but which is needed on the clinical to look at this in the round. Would you suggest that?
Yeah, I think that you need the right people, not just at the top, but all the way through the system. Obviously, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, but also that the treatments are evidence-based and not always influenced by general public's opinions, because with the greatest respect, they're not dealing in this world, so they don't know it particularly. So, for example, I think it's in Portugal, they have systems where they prescribe for clients with intravenous diamorphine, which is heroin.
Yep.
And they got some fabulous results. But here in England, it wouldn't be politically acceptable, as opposed to have little clinics where people could go and inject their heroin if they wanted to in a safe environment. So we tend to make it more of a problem, a crime, rather than dealing with it and hopefully preventing crime by dealing with it.
Now, that's why I actually said that, because I'm familiar with the Portuguese. And I'm also familiar with the British system as it pertains to politics and as it pertains to individuals. We seem to have a lot in the UK, is politicians following elements of what the society say rather than leading. Okay. Now, in one part of my life, I basically ran the strategic analysis unit of the NPRU. That probably means nothing to you, but that's basically domestic extremism. So extremism from the left wing or the right wing and what they do. Now, we used to work closely with Cabinet Office. I set up a system and worked closely with them. And they basically use focus. So the Cabinet Office is basically orientating its view of things to the Prime Minister downward. Now, the reason why I was doing some work with them is they were very keen on getting our view of things. I mean, we'd write very in-depth papers about what's going to happen in 5 years' time, or whatever it might be. And they're interested in our view from the 120,000 police that are running around and the police community safety units and all that sort of stuff. So the deal with me was, let me get your focus groups fields, you'll get what I've got. And then obviously our papers went to them anyway, to the Prime Minister then. So I felt from that experience and from other work that I did in the branch and in MI6 that, frankly, we've got politicians that follow rather than... And so I see that not really happening in the UK, something like what's happened in Portugal, unless, of course, you get maybe the United States who overnight says, we legalise all narcotics, because then they'll feel there's a free hand to say, we can do the same. That's how our kind of systems tend to work. And it's been my argument for many a year. I'm not so sure now, and this is why I want to come back into your prison experience now, just to come off that more generalised person, but into prisons. I'm not so sure if it works now, but if you'd have asked me 30 years ago, when I was doing some work against Colombia in terms of narco-terrorism rather than just narcotics, Pablo Escobar, Medellin and the Cali cartels, I would have said legalize narcotics, because I'd said it was just as stupid as the Volstead Act in the United States. You're just criminalizing people who were going to get this thing anyway. And as you know, with the Volstead Act, after 12 years and then creating massive problems and creating gangsters that never went away thereafter, they had to legalize it again. And so alcohol became legal in the United States again. So for me, it was always legalize this stuff, control it. So half of your people, when coming to your doctors, they don't know what they're taking. They say they're taking heroin, but what are they taking? They're taking it mixed with all sorts of different stuff, depending on what the guy wants to make money out of. So that was the first thing. Second thing is they ask for a Satan drug, and then they're given something else, and they don't know what it is. So even when they're asking specifically for something, they're getting something else. And thirdly, drug dealers, I'm not this guy who's jumping on them saying they're all terrible. They're basically entrepreneurs. And if it means that if I can sell you something that makes me 10 times the amount of money I've put into it, or something I can sell you 4 times, I'm going to try and sell you what is 10 times, right? So there's a movement towards that process, but it's not controlled. And so my argument was control it. I now feel a little bit different, and I only feel different because we didn't control it quick enough. So what we've now got is, and I'd like you to tell the people about this and how you maybe see it within prisons, and then we might get into psychosis in prisons and all that type of stuff, as to what the drugs are now that are available, synthetic narcotics and all that type of stuff, which we wouldn't have had we have legalized it earlier on. I mean, do you think that's correct and a correct analysis? And how would you see us legalizing it now and preventing that type of, spice or crack or whatever it might be that's frankly beyond the pale and difficult to control?
So I think that when they get into drugs, a lot of them have to commit crime in order to get the money for it. And if they can't get one type of drug, they'll get another, and they'll either try and get it through the NHS, pretending that they've got various medical problems, shop around, go into the out-of-hours services, all those kind of things. And as you say, then they mix and match drugs, whereas, a lot of them, if you could get them into a treatment where it was legalised, you wouldn't have so many drug-related deaths, cut down on that completely. They wouldn't have to do so much crime they wouldn't have to do crime. And as you say, these people that deal, they deal not only in the community, but they deal in prison too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you always have a hierarchy in prison with various kind of drug barons, lords at the top, and trying to manipulate people further down, and even trying to how they get drugs into the prison service, into the community there.
So they corrupt officers?
Not just officers, but there's they get people specifically to commit lowish level crime, but enough to get them back into prison. and they'll have already arranged with them that these people will come in packed with drugs.
Yes.
So that then they have their supply to be able to, dish it out in prison and, get whatever. It's not usually so much the money, it's, whatever bits and bobs they can get for themselves in prison. But it also brings them up that big hierarchy.
But that then becomes currency, though, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
You say not the money, but in prison, the bits and bobs are currency.
Yes, yeah. So it's the vapes, it's the whatever. Yeah, but also, you have to be on the hierarchy, to be able to survive.
Exactly.
Genuine.
So we're hitting on 3 or 4 different things. This is fantastic. One of the things is I was never a great. I guess I'm a bit left wing, I was never a great fan. Not a bit, a lot actually, to be realistic. I was never a great fan of prison. When I was studying criminology, we start off with Bethan's prison systems and all the rest of it. We used to have hoods on people and they wouldn't speak to anybody else, and it would be penance, which hence penitentiary. And the whole aim was to rehabilitate, in a sense, through cognizance, understanding of yourself. So you had your hood on and all you'd be thinking about is yourself and why you did this terrible crime and blah, 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 blah. Right. So that supposedly was the idea, if you go back to that. That's obviously not taking into account that they're hanging people for stealing sixpence and all the rest of it. But the point is that from the beginning, there's supposedly been this thing about rehabilitation. But if you send people to a system that's all about king rat, dog eat dog, how can you rehabilitate? Yeah. I asked you that question.
In my opinion, there are far too many people in prison. And Correct. Often, I don't know what the percentage of substance misusers are that are in prison, but it's pretty high in the lower grade prisons, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And what do they learn there? They learn the same things that they've learned on the outside. So they learn about dealing more about trying to get to the top of the ladder. That's what their focus is on, because it makes their life easier, more comfortable. They don't have to worry about looking behind them, who's going to be attacking them next. So that's their focus. Why do they want to focus on rehabilitation as such? This is the world that they know, and they're just going to learn. They do learn an awful lot more from the others in the prison system.
Right.
Prisoners are just they amaze me sometimes in the ways that they can take something and use it to make something else. They're very resourceful. They try cooking up various things, like a little chemistry lab sometimes, to see what they can get a high with, and that's their focus. They don't want to learn, English and maths and maybe go somewhere else when they leave.
Now, is that a matter of resource? Because I've been in prisons not as a prisoner, I hasten to add, in Germany, in Austria, and in the UK. On some jobs that I was doing in the UK, I went into Durham prison to speak to a terrorist. I won't say much more than that, because it was something that we were working on, and assistance could have been aided in that way. So I basically saw a regime that was very, very tight. Keys not shown, this and that, everybody separated on working through their way. Now, I saw a program, and that's like back in the 90s. And then I saw a program latterly in the same prison, and it appeared to me as though the prisoners were now in charge. So it appeared as though the prison's power base had all been soaked away from it. And hence, where they were attempting to do at least something, I now saw a system whereby, and I'll say it frankly and bluntly as it is, the prisoners appeared to run the prison. They cut down on staff. The staff were clearly fearful. And to me, I thought there's nothing going on there. Now, I want you to come back on that, and I'm conscious that you work in the system, so you might not be able to say fully what you wish to say. But then I was in a German prison, and around about the same reasons, and they seemed to be pretty much in charge. They had a lot of staff. It was very tidy, not old-fashioned, very tidy. And in line with German sentences, it's relatively low generally. And they were trying to rehabilitate. Yeah. And the same goes roundabout for the Austrian. So why is ours different?
I think absolutely what you said is that there aren't enough prison officers, not enough funding to be able to do all these kind of things. And so it really is the kind of crisis management, but they do the minimum that they can manage to do, really. And that's such a horrible place to work, isn't it? You get very demoralised, motivated. The prisoners then become problems to you, rather than, you might have started out, I think, wanting to help them and improve them and everything like that. But when there's only, a couple of you on a wing or something like that, and you've got all these men to take out to make their phone calls or go in the exercise yard, you don't have a lot of time to. Sometimes they just need to be listened to, sometimes talked to, given a little bit of kind of, that kind of human to and fro. But as you say, they don't always have that. And then that's when things like mistreatment of prisoners can come in, which I've certainly seen firsthand, and even the healthcare staff get demoralised and don't treat them, as well as they should do. They're just numbers rather than actual people.
Yeah. Now, one of the problems that I do have on the show is that I kind of keep it bite-sized, so listeners can consume it in short bursts. You're commuting to work or whatever. And sometimes I can't get into the weeds. So I'm conscious I'm moving a little bit further away, but I want to get onto the fact that you've been in various categories. And I also want to look at people who you might have seen, who the public might know, who you think might have been, and you don't need to put any names there, but who you think might have been beyond the pale. So up to now, we've been talking about drugs. And by the way, I don't think I've ever seen a criminal who doesn't drink either. So I think alcohol is as bad a thing as narcotics is, to be truthful. But the point is that taking away that aspect of things, drink, drugs, whatever it might be, are there people, in your opinion, because you've treated them, who, for want of a better word, have malcontent in their mind?
So are you meaning that they're inherently evil? Is that what you mean?
I don't want to put that loaded terminology on it. I'm just saying malcontent, right? Because, they may, to them, perceive they have a reason for it. So let's take a suicide bomber example, right? We may turn around and say that's evil because he's blowing himself up in the middle of a load of kids, but he may turn around and say, well, the reason why I'm blowing him up is because that's what you're doing to people in my country and nobody's looking at it. So in his sense, he orientates himself as, it's the same as somebody from the Air Force dropping a bomb on someone. I'm just doing it and I'm blowing myself up as well. So I don't want to put that evil, good element on it. I just want to put on people that you've seen who are just people who want to cause damage.
So I would say that the biggest problems with people like that tend to be in the lower category of prisons or in remand prisons, rather than the Cat A prisons. This is as a kind of general overview, because often the people in the Cat A prisons, maybe they're serial murderers or something like that, they're in there for the rest of their life.
So would you not call those people, though? Would you not say that these please come back. Would you not say that the serial killer is a man of malcontent or a woman of malcontent? Or would you just say they may have just fallen into it? But that's what I don't kind of understand.
Right. So what I was trying to kind of get around is that once they're there for a long period of time, they tend not to, the same stimulus for them perhaps isn't there. Yeah, so they're not around, children or, young females on their own or something like that. So maybe their mindset is just I'm here for a long time, I'm just going to get on with things. And I see that quite a lot. And I was actually quite surprised when I went to Cat A prison that's how it was. And actually, a lot of the trouble that we get in the prisons and in the healthcare and things like that is actually the youngsters, trying to cause fights.
So are you saying that you kind of liked some of these? Because you've been around quite a few of these serial killers and stuff like that, yeah?
I have indeed, yeah.
I'm not asking for any names or anything like that because I'm conscious of your... Yeah. But are you saying you kind of like these people, that they had a liking, a thing that you could get suggest that they were all evil. I've used evil.
Yeah, really surprised that actually they seem to be some of the most, a lot of them seem to be very charismatic. There are obviously some very famous ones who, paranoid schizophrenics who, after a long period of time in prison, they get kind of burned out, and often, the lights are on but nobody's there, sort of thing.
Right.
And they just appear like little old men that you'd meet in the street normally in a wheelchair or something like that. But actually, I've met some super charismatic, very amiable serial killers. Yeah.
Right. So now this excites my blood. So do you think if many of these people had other opportunities, I'm not saying they don't have, but if they did, or from the right, whatever, that they wouldn't have ended up in that serial killing? Or do you think they'd still be driven towards serial killing anyway?
I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, forensic psychiatrist.
I accept that. Anecdotally.
Anecdotally, I think probably they are kind of programmed, if you like, to have that urge to them. But when that ability or opportunity is taken away, then they seem to just fit into what seems to be quite a normal community within some of those wings on the prisons.
So you see where I'm going now? Because where I'm going now is, so this guy comes up against the parole board, right, for whatever reason. He's done 30, 40 years, whatever it might be. And he comes over as he's come over to you. I'm saying guy, I guess there's women as well. He comes over as he's come over to you. And they say, this is a nice fella. He's rehabilitated. But then you put him back into society where the compunction for the urge is back in play.
Yeah.
Do you think he then commits again?
Undoubtedly, some of them do. And I've come across prisoners who have done a longish sentence for murder and have then been released and then have committed murder again. I can think of one particularly who I believe tortured his wife, and then after he'd been released again, he got a girlfriend and tortured her in exactly the same way. So you think, well, what have they learnt in that time they've been in prison? Have they not soul searched or anything like that? But I think sometimes it's, they don't think like we do they? They're psychopaths, sociopaths. They don't have that empathy feeling.
Hence the original question. Because what we find is that politicians in particular, whom have this, they tend to say, let's not let them out. Yeah? Especially if he thinks the public like that. Yeah, because politicians just play to the public 9 times out. But I'm looking for some more technical capacity that says, no, we've checked this guy or this gal, and we think this person can live within society. Or we think they can't. I'd like it to be more scientific. Yeah. But you seem to be saying to me, of course we can never be certain, but you seem to say to me that these guys, charismatic, capable, may even be fooling people for the 20 years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the politician's perspective now on erring on a sense of caution actually takes greater weight and says, maybe this shouldn't be released. I think then that goes against our whole system.
If you've got the history of a serial killer, we're not talking a one-off murder. Perhaps we've got somebody who premeditates and does it many times. I don't think you're going to take that away from them, are you? It's always inbuilt.
True. And the reason why I'm saying this is because, as you know, just because you go to prison for a murder doesn't mean to say you haven't committed 10. Right? So the evidence isn't there. Or the evidence is such that you, in a court of law, wouldn't be able to prove it beyond all reasonable doubt. So you basically go with the murder you can prove.
Yeah.
So now we've got one murder, and that gets a life tariff, 14 years, and then maybe the judge adds a little bit on because of how it was, so it's 20 years. But your man comes in prison and he's fantastic and speaks to you and he's charismatic and blah, blah, blah. And before you know it, well, he's a great guy, he's gone. But he's out doing, when he gets back amongst the people, he's out doing what he's doing. Now, that might not be something like killing women or whatever. It might be something where he's even more calculated in my eyes, where, let's say, he's a guy who goes round because it's advantageous for him to do so. he stabs people in order to, I don't know, make money. Or he's a dealer in drugs, and to make his drug dealing go well, he stabs up and kills people so everybody knows don't play with that guy. Like, how are we to know?
I don't think we are we? We just have to try and do the best we can, really, and protect the public how we can. But they obviously need to have good assessment, don't they? And initially, when they're first brought into prison, as far as I'm aware, they have all the forensic psychiatrists, psychologists. But then after a while, when they move to where they're going to stay a bit longer, you no longer have the forensic psychiatrist, psychologist input quite so much, and then it's general mental health. So you're not assessing as they go along what their patterns of thoughts are. It's only when they get to the end of their big long sentence that you then get a forensic assessment of them. But what have they been doing in all those years that parole board is going to be taking into account? You know, they've been the model prisoner, you know, they've been helping other prisoners, they're good to the staff, you know, all those kind of things. But secretly...
Yeah. They knew what they were going to do when they come back out again. Yeah. Interesting. Into your profession, because as you said, you're not a psychologist, into your profession, into your work in terms of medical care. Yeah. Now, we have a host of television programs that talk about people going in prison and being beaten black and blue every 2 minutes, fights going on all the time. You see them on TV all the time. I hasten to add, not factual programs, but general programs, soaps or whatever else. When I look at the figures for deaths in prison, you see, you know, 2 people a year or whatever it might be in terms of homicide or something. Assaults, obviously more. But is that hidden? Not hidden, because I know you won't be able to answer that. Not hidden. Is that not the real figures because you see more people beaten, but the fella's slipped on the bar of soap, or he's caught himself on the rails, or whatever it might be? But you suspect otherwise, but he would never say.
Yeah, so we only tend to see in healthcare the ones that have got significant injuries. So those are the ones that are reported. And it's only rarely that somebody will come up for, you know, something unrelated, you know, a diabetes check or something like that, and you might have bruises or something on them. You say, how did you get that? So, well, yeah, I don't want to get anybody in trouble, you know, just had a bit of an argument with a bar of soap or whatever.
Right.
So I don't know what a prison officer would probably be able to tell you more.
Right. So for you seeing them, you would say that the figures that you see are in line with the figures that are given by the Home Office. Would you say that then?
Yeah, I would do, because I will only get to see the ones that have got like fractures and things like that, which nobody can kind of cover up. So it has to be reported.
Could I go a step further? Could I say that as opposed to the United States and as opposed to Austria, that our prisons are much safer than in the US and a little bit more dangerous than in Austria? Could we put that? Would that be a nice benchmark? Or I'm looking at figures. Or would that not be true? I'm trying to figure: does a prisoner feel frightened when he's in there? And does a lot go on in there that makes you not get to know what's really gone on? That's what I'm trying to get to.
And I'm probably not the best person to ask about that, because
no, prison officer would be better.
Doctor, I pretty much sit in healthcare. I very rarely go to the wings, so I don't.
Right. Okay.
You know, in their normal environment, I just get to see them as a clinic doctor. And obviously I hear stories from prison officers and things like that, but I don't have that experience in the can't.
As always, I'll just put the disclaimer out as I normally do. Obviously, we deal with people in sensitive areas, and obviously people can't say sometimes one thing or the other, and we never push on the show. So I make that clear. The next thing that I'd like to ask on the healthcare aspect is COVID was out. I believe there wasn't a run on prisons like there were in some parts of the world. Is that because our healthcare systems are actually quite good in prison?
So we like to think so, obviously.
Yeah. You know,
I think the reason is that you can shut them in, can't you? So during COVID, they were locked in their cells 23.5 hours a day.
Right.
So therefore, they're not mixing. so the numbers of COVID are relatively low.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easy to just bang them behind the door. And actually some prisons...
As opposed to, when you say 23 hours a day, just so the public, the listeners get to hear, so that's 23 hours a day as opposed to what would normally be the time you're locked away? What would you normally?
Oh, so they got unlocked in the morning for breakfast, then they might go to work, and then they come back for their lunch and get locked up then till later on in the afternoon. Then they might go out and do more work or education or something, and they have their dinner about 4 o'clock, and then they're locked up in the early evening until the morning again. So they do get quite a few hours out of their cells.
So the average British person, as with most things, by the way, as with my profession, doesn't really understand the British way of doing things. He or she understands the way that's done in the United States because they watch television that predominantly comes from it. So when you say go to work, the picture that comes into my mind, and I guess most people's, is what you see in the United States, either some sort of chain gang or people are working in, I don't know, some type of making something which the prisons then sell on. Is that what you're talking about, or is it much more structured?
So there certainly are a lot of workshops. So, people will, they'll go, it depends on the prison as to which ones they do, but they might make furniture, they might make, do something with guttering and those kind of plastic things. But then there are also kind of the more enhanced prisoners, the ones that are seen as more trustworthy, that will then get better jobs, if you like, so that they might be a cleaner on the wing, they might do some painting, some of them might even do some art for around the prison. So some of those jobs are very much coveted for, and also they get paid a very small amount. That money then allows them to buy biscuits, crisps, stuff from the canteen that they might want, bakes and things.
So again, on this scale, not as harsh as what we might think some of the worst USs are, but not a holiday camp.
Absolutely, yeah, part way between.
Because one of the things I always hear is it's like a holiday camp. They got their own TV, they got their own desk, they got their own living rooms, they got the radio, they're playing pool all day long, they're lying back, and it's the life of Riley. Can you tell listeners this is or is not the case?
In my experience, it's not the case, no.
Yeah. And is that because you've done all the categories, is that in all categories, or is that only orientated to some categories?
So that would be Cat A, B, C, and then obviously some of the open prisons, it's completely different, isn't it? So in open prisons, they're allowed to go into the community, do some work, for example, in a charity shop, or they're allowed to go to outside hospital appointments unaccompanied.
Oh, super. And you think that works well? Does that work well, that system?
Yeah, it seems to work quite well. It helps the prisoners to have some structure to their day, so they're not sat in their cells. And if they're sat in the cells the whole time, they just want to make the time pass, and usually by taking drugs.
So that goes back down the drugs route,
kind of thing. Yeah. Vice is a good one to let them forget a few days,
So, Doctor, you may not know this, but the time has run by massively.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two things that I'd like from you. One is just a quick overview about, if you would like, where were you born? You don't need to tell me the exact place, but how were you born? Were other people doctors before you in your family? How you got into this sphere? And then if you've any questions for me.
So I was born in Kent. My parents were both police officers.
All right.
I just had a fascination with human body, biology, things. That's how I got into it. Originally, I wanted to be a vet, but I didn't get the grades to be a vet, sadly, so I became a doctor instead.
That's interesting to me. Hold on. So you need higher grades to be a vet than you do a doctor?
Absolutely, yeah. So
I didn't realise that. I know they've obviously got more species to look at, but I didn't realise that you're great. So we're secondary on the scale.
I think it's more doctors than vets, so they can be more.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Did you hear that, good people? We are secondary on the scale. I know we think we're the best, but we're clearly not. Vets get animals get the best doctors. Okay, that's interesting. No, I'm joking. Of course, you are a great doctor. So you got into that. You went to school. Was it a normal everyday school, or were you at a fee-paying school? I mean, I guess what I'm trying to find out here is there still a preponderance of doctors who come from a certain class?
I think obviously, yeah, because it's a long course. It's expensive to go to. But yeah, I came from a middle class background, normal schools. So yeah, if you're there and you get the opportunities and you work hard, anyone can do it. You know, if you've got the aptitude, you don't have to have a background behind you.
And the reason why I'm asking that is obviously we've got a massive shortage of doctors as well. And we seem not to have been filling this quota for the last 30 odd years. Why? Quite quickly. Why? Somebody like you who has done that, could you be inspiring somebody listening to this right now who's 15 and 16 and not sure, could they, regardless of where they came from, with average aptitude, could they make their way through?
Yeah, it's an amazing profession and it's a real privilege to be a doctor. People let you into their lives, their thoughts, their families. Yeah, it is amazing, but it's also very hard work, very stressful, very easy to get burned out. So if you come into medicine, I think you need a clear path and clear boundaries for yourself. So when I started general practice, it was lovely. Had my own list, followed people through, cradle to grave, got to know everybody. But by the time I finished, I was working 13-hour days and all impersonal, like a call centre. That's not.
So why can we not fill the quota?
We can't fill the quota because people leave because they get demoralised by this. Yeah.
But we're not even getting them to that stage. That's the point I'm making. We're not getting enough to that. Why are we not getting people to that stage?
You get people qualified as doctors, but then when they have to go through the further training and they have to work all these very, very long hours, and the demands are so high at the moment on their patients' expectations, new technologies, so new treatments. People want more and more, and you've got the old internet, and people think, well, I want this treatment and that treatment, and and it's just relentless.
So we are getting people through then. We are getting the initial numbers through. We're just not carrying on from there. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah, we need more numbers initially, definitely.
Right. Okay.
And I think if we can get more of the numbers through, then it will ease the burden on the profession, and things will get better with anything. But once you start on that downward slope, sometimes it's a bit hard to crawl back up without a big injection of feeding. So.
Interesting. So, any last thoughts for myself? Anything you'd like to ask me, or you don't need to?
I was interested about when you said that you went in and were talking to terrorists. In what kind of capacity was that there from the government?
So I've worked in different roles. When I was in Scotland Yard Special Branch, and basically that is the organisation in the old days, it's now disbanded, was so for 100 years, that basically carried out our national security work in all its guises, from protection to prevention of terrorism, espionage, counter-proliferation, i.e. no-nuclear weapons, blah, 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 all the way through. And that's generally in tandem, because in Britain, unlike in most countries, we've got two systems. One is the security service, MI5, which you will have heard about, and then you had police special branch, because MI5 have no police powers, can't arrest people, can't demand that people talk to them, can't do anything like that, which the police obviously can. So the branch, which was formed first, back in 1883, its job was always to do the national security work. So that was one thing. At the time that you're talking about, though, on that particular job, I was working as a case officer, which is a guy who, for want of a better scenario, does the kind of James Bond work in MI6, which real name is the Secret Intelligence Service. And obviously we work around the world. with a lot of different agencies, and the job is obviously espionage and preventing espionage and obviously countering terrorism, non-proliferation, but from external to the country, not in the country. And I was working with another country, and I had access to their people, and I wanted to give their people access, in their jails, wherever else, and I get access to. I also, in the branch now, in the NPYU, which I told you about before, which was part of a national special branch, and I was writing, and in fact, I started the organisation that wrote strategic papers. I wanted to speak to, Carlos Sajaco?
No. Oh, yeah.
You never heard of it? Yeah, Carlos Sajaco. Okay. Well, this is a guy in the 70s who was a prolific terrorist, went around the world, terrorists for hire, Palestinian jobs, all over the world. And he finally got arrested in France and is in prison in Paris. And I wanted to speak to Carlos. So again, I was trying to get into prison to see Carlos. I also wanted to go to Israel to speak to, I know that sounds silly, but suicide bombers. They got there, they had the bombs on them, and for whatever reason didn't, or somebody else didn't press the button. Or somebody did press the button, but it didn't go off. So, you want to speak to these guys. Why do you do it? Blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of reasons why you do things like that, to go into prison, to speak to people, is to try and get an understanding of how they function. That guy Copeland as well, who did the nail bombings in Brixton. And so, again, trying to get to speak to Copeland. He agreed initially. He's not a great fan on people of colour, so then disagreed subsequently. So I was going to send one of my guys to speak to him, a white officer to speak to him, and he then. So it's about trying to understand the individual who's carrying out these acts. Why do you do it? In his case, right-wing extremism. Why do you do it? With Norvik, the guy had been in Scandinavia, in Norway. Why did you do it? What makes you feel you're going to kill all these people on this island who happen to be up-and-coming politicians because you think white supremacy isn't functioning? So you want to know that. You need to understand them. Hence, that's why.
And they often quite forthcoming, Carlton.
Most of them you can't get to in the end. Most of them actually, with Carlos, the French didn't want me to speak to him in the end. He was happy. And I'm guessing because, yes, terrorism is a motherhood subject, but, these fellas might know a lot of secrets that are not advantageous to particular countries. And I'm guessing that's how that went that way. So in the end, it's allowed to speak to him by the authorities. When you do get to speak to these guys and gals, obviously they're going to have their perspective for what they do. And I'm not saying their perspective is negative. The perspective is how they perceive the world. People can justify things to themselves that way. So yes, forthcoming, but does that mean it's truthful? You can spin that either way. It's intelligence gathering. So at the end of the day, it's gathering intelligence. So you got to figure which way. But it's all good, to speak to people and get an idea. And maybe you prevent somebody else, or maybe you understand how somebody else is trying to do something down the line, and you can prevent an atrocity going on. So that's. So listen, I've got to say thank you very much, because our time is up, and we're going to have to condense a little bit. And it's been fantastic, actually. We could have you back, because I feel I've just touched the surface of what you know.
I've got a few stories.
I think we're going to have you back in the future. Would you be happy to come back on the show?
I'd be very happy, Carlton. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, yeah.
Well, Doctor, that's brilliant. I'm going to give you an official title, because I love to do that. Yeah. Thank you very much. And we will see you again. And for all you listeners, don't forget, please do subscribe, and we'll see you again next week.
If you'd like to help Carlton keep producing the Black Spy podcast and receive episodes and information that's only available to Carlton's special Patreon agents, then you can donate as little as £3, €4 or $5 a month by signing up with Patreon. See the Black Spy podcast notes, or Google Patreon Black Spy podcast and pledge your monthly amount. You can even win the opportunity to be a guest on the show. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for free.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes, and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.